And this is Main Street. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. I'm with you here until 6 o'clock. On Sunday, the 2016 Formula One season revs up with the Australian Grand Prix in Melbourne. That kind of motor racing and its history is a passion of Paul Chenard, who's an artist based in Halifax. He may be the most published motorsports artist alive, with his work featured in Victory Lane, Sports Car International, and Motorsport magazine. A graduate of NASCAD and a graphic designer, he now produces between 50 and 100 works a year, and he exports almost all of them. Paul Chenard stopped by the CBC studio earlier today. Welcome to Main Street.
Merci.
So where did this passion for illustrating scenes from motorsports come from?
Well, as a graphic designer, I'm a very visual guy, and I was collecting vintage racing toys because vintage toys are very graphic and visual and colorful. And I got my first dinky Grand Prix car from the 50s, and it was a Ferrari, but it was blue and yellow. I said, why is it blue and yellow? Like, there's a visual language to colors. And I thought it should be red. So I looked it up, and I started buying books to find out, and I found out that was Argentinian racing colors. And that kind of intrigued me. I started reading more and more, and the more I read, the more I wanted to read, and the more I studied it, I found a real passion in it, and especially the stories of the racers and the teams. And anyway, that's how I kind of got hooked on it that way.
Did you collect dinky cars when you were a child?
Yeah, but we used to melt them down to reuse the metal for other things, which is kind of creative but really stupid. So anyway, I've nothing left. I've one molten pile of metal that used to be I think a Buick Century or something, a Corgi toy. So we were very creative kids. We were allowed to be very creative when we were kids.
It sounds like it.
Yeah. No one got killed, so that's good.
So since this is radio, can you describe what your images look like, the ones that you create?
Well, I try, when you're watching a race, I've kind of realized that there's artists who paint every detail in the background. And if you're watching a race, you don't see a race that way. You see your favorite driver, you see part of the race car as it's going by. Everything is as a blur. So that's kind of the approach I take to racing scenes, because to me that's more realistic than painting photorealism, because that's not how you see a race. It's no one I know can see a race that way.
What medium do you use?
I think I'm like an easily bored child, because I use everything from, when I sketch live, I do pen and ink and markers, but I do laser cut stainless steel. I like exploring medium. I do acrylic on canvas, more traditional, but I've done pen and ink on canvas, which is not what they don't tell you to do that. If you learn traditionally, they would say you do pen and ink on watercolor paper or something, but not on canvas. So I challenge that.
But how big is the market for this type of work?
In Canada, it's kind of zero, really. But in England, I'm treated like a rock star when I go to the events. People come up to me, and I don't even know these people. And when it first happened, people came up to me and said, "Are you Paul Chenard?" And when someone you've never met in your life comes up to you and says your name, it's a little creepy. I want to ask them if they were with Interpol. Did I do something wrong, 30 years ago? And then they said, "Oh, I love your art." And I went, "Oh, okay." And now that happens kind of all the time. There's a lot of people that follow me on Facebook. They're not all people I know, but they come up to me, and it kind of confirms, because I'm not doing very well because I'm living in Canada. But then you go there and you find out that your art's very appreciated, and the approach I have to art, my different approaches, I think, are I'm kind of the loose cannon of the automotive art world, because I don't stick to one thing. So life's too short for that.
So where would these images be popping up? Where would people be seeing them, and they would become so familiar through them?
Well, in the magazines, because I've been published. I've nurtured a lot of relationships with key editors of magazines, and so I'm getting known that way.
Would these be race car publications?
Well, for example, the most popular ones would be Motorsport magazine out of the UK, Octane magazine, Classic and Sports Car. Those are the three big magazines internationally, and they cover vintage racing and vintage automotive sports cars and things like that. So through that, it's amazing. Anyone can be on the internet, but when you're published in a magazine, that's where the credibility comes from. It's published. They put ink on paper showing my work, so that seems to nurture more credibility than the internet.
So why do you think motor racing would be more popular in other countries? Why do you think it's not as popular here?
We don't have the history. I mean, most of the Formula One teams are based in England. The racing history is mostly based in Europe. And England, I've never met more passionate motorsport people than the English. Like, North Americans like to think they own it. They're not even close. I go to an event called the Goodwood Revival where there's 145,000 participants. It celebrates the happenings on Lord March's Goodwood estate from about 1930 to 1966, and everyone dresses vintage. And if you don't dress vintage, you look like an idiot at this event, because 99% of the people, and they're so true to it, they don't have any new vehicles on the grounds. So as soon as you walk through the gate, you're in the world's largest movie set, and you're part of it. It's quite exciting. 3 days of it. It's a real rush. I've gone the last 5 years. So.
And you'll be tuned into the Australian Grand Prix on Sunday?
Actually, you know what? I don't follow modern racing because I like stories. And there's no stories in modern racing. There's this new technology. This guy has this new earring, and he gets this much money. End of story. And it's like, when you start reading about motorsport history, and like one of my heroes is Juan Manuel Fangio, that guy was so classy, and he win on pure skill, and they were just classy people. And now, because of the public relations side of things, the stories are scrubbed clean. You don't get any real... You don't get the personality of the drivers or even of the team managers. Everything's run through a filter. So there's nothing to, really illustrate. So
what's lost when you say things are being run through a filter?
Well, the actual personality. There could be a James Hunt character out there, but you will never find out.
I don't know who James Hunt is.
Oh, James Hunt. He was, the movie Rush. He was he was a world champion in 1976 out of England, but he was a good-looking guy, and the woman just fell for him right, left, and center. And there's if you read up on him, you'll find out he was a very colorful character. He would arrive to formal events in sandals and a T-shirt. He just kind of played his own drum, and
so in some ways, is your work trying to capture this golden era?
Well, trying to capture the stories. It was interesting. That's what I'm trying to... One of the reasons I started doing art, in studying racing history and collecting automotive racing things, I want to collect art. I was reading these great stories, and the artists weren't illustrating it. Like, for example, I'll do the Ferrari garage the night before the 64 Le Mans race. I don't know of any artist that bothers with that, but that's part of the story. So there's stories to tell, and I find that artists are not really telling the story. It's like, well, this car won that race. Well, there's a bigger story than that. There's the people, the team, the mechanics, the car, all that. And when you put it all together, there's a lot of stories to tell, and I find they're not telling them. So that's my raison d'être with my art. So.
Well, thank you so much for coming in today and sharing some of these stories. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it was great. I loved it.
Paul Chenard is a motorsports artist, and he lives and works in Halifax. Well, if you're